What prompted me to write this lady in this manner was that I had received a tax bill from the British government. I didn't mind that so much. The British had been very hospitable to me, and I didn't mind the small amount they were charging. But what got me was the category under which they classified my taxable income. Wanting to get to the bottom of this, I wrote an open letter to the Queen of England. This was how the letter began. Madam, you will remember that last May, Mr. Edward Bright, the clerk of the Inland Revenue Office, wrote me about a tax which he said was due from me to the government on books of mine published in London. That is to say, an income tax on the royalties. I do not know Mr. Bright, and it is embarrassing to me to correspond with strangers, for I was raised in the country and have always lived there. The early part in Marion County, Missouri, before the war, and this part in Hartford County, Connecticut, near Bloomfield, and about 8 miles this side of Farmington, though some call it 9, which it is impossible to be, for I have walked it many and many a time in considerably under 3 hours. And General Harley says he has done it in 2 1/4, which is not likely. So it has seemed best that I write Your Majesty. In the letter, I went on to explain that I had never met Her Majesty personally, but that I had once met her son, the Prince of Wales, on Oxford Street in London. He was marching at the head of a temperance procession, I wrote, while I was on the top of an omnibus, and that I thought the prince would surely remember me on account of a gray coat with flat pockets which I happened to be wearing, I being the only person on the omnibus who had on that kind of a coat. I explained the difficulty that I had had in understanding the category under which I was being taxed. There was a footnote on the list which stated that I was taxed under Schedule D, Section 14. I had turned to that place and found these 3 things: trades, offices, gasworks. I did not regard authorship as a trade, and I had no office, so I did not consider that I was taxable under Schedule D, Section 14. I concluded the letter this way: having thus shown Your Majesty that I am not taxable, but am the victim of the error of a clerk who mistakes the nature of my commerce, it only remains for me to beg that you will, of your justice, annul my letter that I spoke of, so that my publisher can keep back that tax money which, in the confusion and aberration caused by the document, I ordered him to pay. You will not miss the sum, but this is a hard year for authors, and as for lectures, I do not suppose Your Majesty ever saw such a dull season. With always great and ever-increasing respect, I beg to sign myself Your Majesty's servant to command, Mark Twain. This open letter was published in Harper's Magazine and thereafter widely copied, and the Queen's son, Prince Edward, the Prince of Wales, saw it too. Here's how I know that. Some years later, I really did meet the Prince. As we parted, I told him how glad I was to have met him. He replied to me, "Nice to meet you again, Mr. Twain." I said, "Why, have we met before?" The Prince smiled and said, "Oh, yes, don't you remember that day when you were on the top of a bus and I was marching at the head of a temperance procession and you had on your new overcoat with the flat pockets?" I could relate so many more experiences about places I've infested, whether just briefly or for a longer time. From the Sandwich Islands to Australia and New Zealand, France, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Italy, Spain, Sweden, Turkey, Greece, Russia, England, of course, even India, Ceylon, South Africa, from which I've just returned. I barely touched on my work.